Begin transmission. Today we'll talk about birds, those amazing feathery flighted creatures that dominate the skies. Again, if you ignore all the insects and just kind of forget about the existence of insects, birds are the dominant life form that have colonized the air. And their roles in ecosystems are very profound. They are often apex predators. They are also often pollinators. And the relationship between bird pollinators and their flowers is really fascinating to me. Oftentimes you see this long-lasting, mutually beneficial co-evolution between, for example, hummingbirds and the orchids and other flowers that they pollinate. So, for example, this is one of my favorite hummingbirds. It's a sword-billed hummingbird, and if you look at the bill on this creature, it's about the same size as its entire body. So this is a specific adaptation for a specific flower, and these two species have co-evolved. The flower has evolved a long kind of petal thing. I don't really know much about flowers, but the flower part is long and cylindrical, and then the bird's beak fits right in there. And what makes this unique is that other hummingbirds, there's plenty of other hummingbirds around, each with their own unique little flower. And so this flower and the sword-billed hummingbird just perfectly match. And so it's a really great example of how birds and flowers can benefit each other, and how that can provide selectional pressure to becoming more and more specialized. So here is just a cute little video of the hummingbird. Because its bill is so long, if it has an itch, it can't use its beak to prune itself or to scratch itself, so it has to use its little back foot, which is pretty adorable. Today we'll be learning about 4 individual species of birds, which is not very much, especially when you consider the absolute enormous variety of behaviors and morphologies, interesting life stories that all these birds can tell. So I've just chosen 4, but you should know that there are hundreds of really interesting things we can talk about birds. So these are just 4 that I've chosen for us to learn from class Aves. Beginning with Plosius. Plosius, I chose this one because birds are remarkably intelligent, and oftentimes this intelligence is displayed in their how they engineer and craft their homes. So birds typically live in nests, and Plosius is a weaver bird, a member of a whole group of birds that make nests with these intricate weaving plant parts. Sometimes leaves, sometimes grasses, sometimes stems. And weaver birds spend weeks upon weeks making these elaborate homes to live in, and it's just remarkable. They go out and they find a specific species of grass and then weave it in, and it's almost like they have a mental idea of what they want their home to be. And then usually these are monogamous pairs, and so a male and female will build this home together and then settle down to raise their family. Weaver birds in the genus Plosius, a lot of them are colonial, and so not only do you have individual homes, you live in a nice little neighborhood. And so all these little structures you see here are in a tree, a little colony of Plosius weaver birds all hanging out together. And I'm just consistently impressed with the craftiness of these birds. Some other species use mud, other species use leaves, but weaver birds are pretty remarkable. And they make fantastic nests. Another example of the intelligence of birds is in their mating dances, and sometimes their mating dances can be phenomenally complex, and the males have to understand and display several different steps at once. And so the female is looking for a male who has, the 6-step dance down to a T, and is just remarkably beautiful and coordinated and gets all the boxes checked on her little dance checklist. So Parodia is a 6-plumed bird of paradise, and birds of paradise are famous for their elaborate mating rituals, and they live on an island, and oftentimes they have evolved these really enormously flamboyant colors and behaviors, oftentimes on the ground. And this is a little counterintuitive, because if you are a small, delicious bird, you don't really want to paint yourself in bright blue and metallic colors and then hang around on the ground. But in these island systems, there are no predators for these birds. And so the selective pressure hasn't been towards camouflage or escape behavior. Rather, the selection pressure has been towards more and more complicated mating dances. And so what we see here is a really cool example of how evolutionary pressures kind of push animals towards certain traits. In this case, the lack of predators has really revealed how complex these dances and these rituals can be for birds. There's a link to a video here that you can see a whole lot of different birds of paradise, including the Parodia, doing its really fantastic mating dance. So make sure to look at that if you have a chance. One of the most unusual bird species is the emperor penguin in genus Aptenodytes. These species are 4 feet tall, which is pretty gigantic for a penguin, and they choose to live in a very unusual environment. They live in the southern poles and a very cold environment, and so their feathers are adapted to keep water out and heat in, and their whole lifestyle is adapted for this really unique climate. They have to survive sub-freezing temperatures for months at a time, and they do this by all huddling together for warmth. So in the coldest winter months, they form this gigantic circle using body heat. But if they do this, if you remember, some insects do this, and all the outer layers get frozen and die, and so only the inner layers survive. But in emperor penguins, they form this nice little slowly rotating whirlpool of penguins, and so everybody gets a chance to be on the inside and everybody gets a turn on the outside. So most of the colony will survive every year unless resources are diminished or it's exceptionally cold, but this kind of colonial system where everybody kind of does their part increases survival of everybody. Now, when they lay eggs, the eggs are laid on land, and primarily the male will guard the eggs, and the male will spend several weeks to months at a time waiting for the female to return from getting food, and the male will lose about 50% of his body weight during this time. So a lot of the parental care falls on the male during this time because the fishing grounds are very, very far away from the breeding grounds. Typically, they breed in monogamous pairs, so once the female returns, then the male gets to take his chance to go get some food. So a really remarkable species, adapted to cold weather, underwater, swimming, eating fish, and surviving the cold. This is just a strange-looking creature. This is Cassowaries, the cassowary, and cassowaries look very dinosaurian. You can kind of see some reminiscent theropod-like qualities, right? Look at those gigantic legs with those 3-toed feet and the tremendous claws. Very short, stubby forearms. You can't really even see them. These are flightless birds, so their feathers aren't really flight feathers, and they're kind of more, almost more like fuzzy hair than they are like feathers. The cassowaries have this gigantic crest made out of bone. They have 2 floppy little wattles on their necks for communication, and they're a very aggressive bird. This belongs to a group of birds called ratites, which include ostriches and emus. But these guys, when they're threatened, they will jump and slash with their powerful legs if they're cornered, and can really do some damage. So this is the cassowary, a very unusual, fleet-footed, very dangerous. They can get about 6 feet tall, so this isn't something to mess with. And that is our 4 birds: the weaver birds, the emperor penguins, the cassowary, and the Parodia, the dancing bird. Tensions were quite high yesterday when we returned from Snake Island and reported the death of Dr. Cordyceres and shared our concerns that perhaps the crew had acted a little brashly and had maybe misguidedly banished Dr. Cordyceres' island. Dr. Arnold is still concerned about the navigation. I brought forward the evidence of the mysterious ice cream in the quarters opposite of where Dr. Cordyceres lived. And the rest of the crew were quite upset about this.
I think partly is a defensive response, right? If we were wrong about that, then we basically just condemned poor Dr. Cortaceres to death, and none of us really wants to deal with that heaviness. Well, after a little bit of a kerfuffle, especially the captain was quite adamant that the right call had been made. I feel like he smelled something treasonous afoot and wanted to stop all talking about mistakes that he may have made as the captain of the ship. And so the two different camps split. On one side, we have the captain and Isabella, Vector and Dave. On the other side, Dr. Arnold and I and Charlie, and then we've convinced Master Sergeant Rush to kind of reopen the investigation, although the captain isn't letting us do that formally. The four of us had a delicious dinner that Master Sergeant Rush prepared himself, and then went to bed. The next morning we woke up, and Charlie and I went out for our morning jog, and at breakfast, Master Sergeant Rush and Dr. Arnold were missing, and they were missing late into the morning. And when we finally checked in on them, we went to their quarters, one after the other, and first Master Sergeant Rush was found face down on his bed, dead. Next to him, Dr. Arnold, in the quarters next door, we found Dr. Arnold face down on his bed, dead. Two very close friends and important members of this crew have now been taken from us, and the autopsy revealed that they've been killed with a trachotoxin. And this is the same toxin, of course, that was used with Dr. Mastronomer. So someone on board, not Dr. Cortaceres, unless he can resurrect himself from the dead, which I don't think he can do, as far as I know. Someone else on this crew has a pretty substantial supply of this trachotoxin and is using it to kill members of this crew. So it turns out, as far as we can tell, Dr. Cortaceres was innocent, but whoever was the murderer was feeling some pressure by this new coalition of Arnold, Rush, myself, and Charlie, and they've taken two of us out. So Charlie and I are quite concerned. Josh, Alfredo, you guys may be the only ones we can trust here. So do your best to keep us safe.